Okay, you sit down and you get your blood pressure, you get all these other vitals and things like that. All that data is being sent up, and then when 15 minutes later you're sitting down in a video conferencing session live with this nurse practitioner with all this data analytics that's coming down live in front of you. Okay, very, very cool stuff, but it's got to be HIPAA compliant. Okay, and this data is going from devices to the cloud and processed on the cloud and moving down, and you think this is like a very complex process. So as a company, Quantum IoT, that's what we do. You know, we try to figure out how to make sure that those kinds of things work all the time, and that's why that device was actually originally built. That device was actually originally built because we do these remote things. We have no idea what carrier is going to work, right? And so we basically built that device so that it would choose the best carrier dynamically in real time, okay, and be able to give you a high degree of probability that you'll be able to get data to schlep back and forth in a very secure fashion. This is a really interesting article. This was actually from some people that I know down at UT Austin, and what they did was they spoofed GPS. And they spoofed GPS in such a way that they actually forced a tanker, okay, to go a different direction because it was being GPS steered, okay. And so they faked the satellite system, you know, by, you know, just basically transmitting at a higher, you know, right? You get it? Okay, it's crazy. So you got to worry about that kind of stuff. So mitigating methods and issues. You know, one of the mitigating methods is secure APNs. The problem is managing. There really aren't that many systems out there that can manage hundreds of thousands of APNs, okay, for secure APNs. So if you think about it, from a network issue, it's a very different scale problem than the types of problems that you guys may be used to, okay? Numbers of devices that are out there are, you know, perhaps 10,000 times more than the hundreds of devices or thousands of devices that you know, when you're talking about managing a network of laptops and servers and that kind of stuff. You're not talking about managing, like for instance at Numerex, we manage, you know, 2.5, 3 million devices. Secure TLS 1.1 and 1.2, that's pretty standard off-the-shelf stuff, right? And so, you know, the implementation, the nice thing about this is that a lot of the things you already know about network security are applied directly to, but here's the big if. The big if is to what processor, right? Because, yeah, you can get that down to a gateway, but can you really get it all the way down to the device? You know, what level of device, what capabilities on the device you have to have in order to have, you know, some sort of a secure tunnel. Certainly key-based encryption from the cloud standpoint, things that you're real familiar with. Role-based security is very, very important, but it's a little weird now, right? Because the role of who or whom, right?
And that's what my question was going to be to basically, where is the delineation from what the Cloud Security Alliance is asking versus NIST or any of those standards? Because in my experience, CSA just mimics everybody else.
That's right.
And they kind of incorporate it and say it's theirs.
Yeah, but that's you know, having been a chairman of a standards group, that's the right way to do it. Frankly, is if somebody else, when I was a chairman, I used to say, man, don't invent anything, just steal ruthlessly.
That too. However,
yeah.
I like to go to the source because they're the ones.
No, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. And a lot of times in these alliances, like the 1MDM Alliance and things like that, do that. They basically provide the link to the source rather than providing their own standard, which is a new frickin' number, and you have no idea that it's actually based on somebody else's frickin' number. And the reason why they do that, if you've ever been on a standards committee, which is like I said, stick needles in my eyes. Basically, you go to lots of interesting places around the world that you never get out of a closed room. That and you stay in a lot of airport hotels, and you go eat rubber chickens with a bunch of people around a table of 10 that aren't very interesting. Okay, I mean that's really what it is about being in a standards committee. So role-based security and segregated duties are important, and you know, the Cloud Security Alliance and GSMA and things like that are a great standards group to be able to provide those kinds of things. But here's the problem. The problem is that the role of who? Because when they wrote these standards, they thought about people being at the end of this device, okay? And in this case, there ain't one, okay? And so it's a completely sort of a different use case than that.
So the CSA is a superset of CSI, the CIS or the CAS?
No, it's the organization.
No, separate.
Claims their cloud security.
Right.
They're pretty much a nonprofit organization like ISC Square.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all that they do.
That's all they do, is they basically exploit other people's standards.
So then still the
Thanks for keeping it real.
but still the CIS rules are still followed, right?
No. Basically, what they're trying to do is point you to their website for hits. All of the stuff that they're pulling comes from either NIST or some variation of NIST.
Or the 2700 deals are one.
Right, it's either going to be from the special publication 800 series or the 500 series. That's all that they're pulling from. So if you really just go to the source of NIST, look at the special publication 800, 144, 145, 146, it will pretty much tell you everything there is to know about cloud.
So, if I sort of pass out up here, it's because I've been in a hospital most of the week.
Oh.
I had a bout with it wasn't a virus. I thought it was the flu. I had 103 temperature on Friday, and I finally got it down on Tuesday. But I had to spend some time in the hospital in order to do it. But anyway, I'm good right now. So,
Thank you.
So we just brought a virus in the room.
oh, and I'm not. It's not a virus. So
No, I'm
it's-
joking.
Yeah. It was a bacterial infection, but it's not contagious. So I'm told.
Raj can fix it.
Yeah, Roger will take care of it.
Yeah, it's funny because are you a doctor? Yeah. Okay, well, I am, but my aunt looked at me when I finished my PhD, which is in artificial intelligence and robotics, and she looks at me after graduation like I'm really proud that I just finished and all this kind of stuff, and she looks at me and she says, well, you ain't going to be one of those doctors that could do nobody no good. And I'm like, what? I can remember in order to graduate, it's just an aside, just because we'll take a little break here, but I can remember I had a hard time graduating. It took me a while to finish my PhD, and I can remember for motivation I would go to the graduation ceremonies at UT Arlington and sit in there, and I would go to the science and engineering one, and the ones that impressed me were the chemistry majors, right? Because they project the name of your dissertation up on the top above the stage. I mean, and so one guy's had, duo, diclol, super whatever, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it was like incredible. It went like across at 2 lines, I mean, almost 3. It was amazing. And I thought to myself, here's my motivation. I'm going to have the longest title in history of dissertations for fun, right? And for fun, I'm going to embed a hidden message inside of it. And so my dissertation title, I have a copy of it, but unfortunately my senior professor figured it out. But if you took the first letter of each of the words, it spelled out, "Don't worry, be happy." Anyway, so other best practices, there's a real problem with internet addresses. We're exploiting, IPv4 is, pretty much depleted from an international standpoint. Interestingly enough, at Varia, the company that I was talking about from an ISP standpoint, that we grew up 20 years ago, and I was president of the company for a very short period of time before they figured out that I was pretty dysfunctional in a company that size, and so I did other things. But we did, from a technology standpoint, do some cool stuff. We did IPv6, the first in the world, IPv6, 20 years ago. And so to give you an idea how long it takes actually to get adoption of this kind of stuff, it's like crazy. But we better do it fast, because the problem now is, from an IoT standpoint, is that you can't get a decent amount of address space from IANA in order to go out and give static IPs to these devices that are in the field. So all of a sudden, but you need public IPs. So all of a sudden you have this reuse of IPs that are out there for all these different carriers, and so it's very easy to exploit that. You know the IP address space. In an IPv6 address space, the probability of you hitting an IP from doing a scan, a port scan, or regular IP scan is like 0, because it's no more than the molecules in the universe kind of stuff. So, got to think about that. So fixed addresses can be used with the depletion of IPv4 space, blah, blah, blah. Device-based security, here's the problem. And I liked putting this talk together, because after I found out that a lot of the people in the room were not embedded people, were not IoT-ish kind of folks, I thought that we have one. That's right. 2, okay, 2. 3, give me 3, give me 3, 3, maybe everybody. No, but the point is that a lot of things can be related to enterprise type exploitations, but a lot of things have just completely different use cases. And so, for instance, when you think about things like firewalls, usernames, and passwords, what's that mean in an embedded world? Okay, because you don't have enough processing power to put, and if you put the firewall down at the device, what's the problem? You're paying for the data. If the data gets down to your device, who pays for it? You do. Okay, that's a problem. Okay, so that means you need to figure out how to put a firewall on the cloud. Okay, and now you don't have a firewall at the device, and so if somebody can compromise the network between the cloud and the device, you see where I'm going? And that's not, so it's completely different than. And then, brute force attacks and port scans are also a high data cost. You've got denial of service. So the other week, who's familiar with the DEN attack that happened the other week? Okay, so, DEN is basically a very large domain name service, right? And, provider. We use domain name services on a lot of the devices that we have. And so, and there's two interesting things about that particular problem, that cyber attack, okay, to me. One is that the devices that it used, okay, were what? Yeah. Embedded devices. They basically exploited things like cameras that were running Linux, okay, and those cameras started sending, DOS attack messages or doing DNS lookups basically to the DEN system from all over the world. Okay, and so they basically compromised all these people that never changed their password on things like the router or things like their Rabbit, all these Ethernet devices. Okay, they compromised them. Okay, and then had them start sending commands all at the same time, synchronized. Okay, I thought that was fascinating. The other one was how long it took for anybody to figure it out. Okay, and that part of it, the fact that that we had our degradation in one of my clients' facilities started happening about 8 o'clock, 8:10 that morning or something like that, and I sent out a tweet about it, and it. I had thought something was going on, but we didn't see anything from CERT until, what, over an hour later or something like that? It was like, what's that all about? Best practices, post facto. Post facto is kind of useless, but you definitely need to trace back to find out what's going on so you can actually fix something later on. But there is a trouble with anonymity. There's an easy way to do anonymity, particularly with devices. By anonymity, I mean, can you spoof a MAC address? Can you spoof, a lot of the aspects like an EIN number on cell phone? Yeah, easily. Okay, you can spoof. People do it all the time with even PK encryption inside of the SIM itself. Remote initiated connection, cellular connectivity works well on the client-server model. It certainly does. If you think about it, in IoT, you get a problem here, okay? And that is that you basically have a client-server model, okay? So the server's up here, the client's down here. Client, typically in an IoT system, the typical use case is where the client figures out that there's an exception, okay, or some kind of an event like time, and takes information and sends it back up to the server. Okay? Great use case. Well, that's easy to do because the client knows what? It knows the server's IP address, or it can look it up using a DNS request. Okay? On the other hand, if you have NAT or you have dynamic IP addresses, okay, because you don't have static IP space, okay, the server has no way to know what the IP address is of the dude down here. And so you have to create all kinds of crazy things in order to make that happen. It's called shoulder tap. Okay, and so somehow the server up here has to send out a message out of band. In most cases we use SMS. What's the problem with that in the LTE world? It's all IP. It's an all IP network. And so LTE actually creates another capability. And in fact, if you look at release 16, okay, which will be not next year, but probably the following, you're going to see a lot of things that are very specific to machine and IoT in the LTE in order to be able to do these kinds of things, to be able to tell. And what has to happen by that time is IPv6. Okay? So, device-based VPNs, we talked a little bit about that. You know, you got to worry about keep alive and dead peer, but in order to do that, it costs you a lot of data, and data is just not cheap. And so there's a, you know, a bit of that kind of problem. Then what I did basically was I said, oh, okay, let me just throw some stuff out there about some of the authentication methods, some of the encryption methodologies and things like that. You know, I don't want this to be an eye test and I don't want to put you to sleep this afternoon, but what I'll do is make this available to you, okay? And that way, you know, if you need something, and a lot of times with my talks, it's more of a place for you to kind of go, you know, let me go see where I am on the level and the hierarchy of understanding, you know, and so you just go through the slides and kind of mark, never seen it before, can define it, you know, can describe it to a Boy Scout, you know, and you sort of, there's the levels of understanding, you know, in some of these, you know, types of things. And so there's a big long list of that kind of stuff. In fact, it may even be replicated. There's some pen testing, SHA, 256 encryption. You know, there's a lot of policy and things like that are going on, but, you know, certainly HIPAA. I've done a lot of stuff with HITRUST, a lot of stuff that those are both healthcare acts that have to do with security. The unfortunate part is that luckily, in most cases, they've just not made stringent requirements because nobody could pass them. And so this is where we are from a maturity index standpoint relative to the standards on HIPAA and HITECH. And then with PCI DSS, which many of you are familiar with, you know, for doing credit card transactions and things like that, that's a very mature standard. Now for being able to do some of these things. And there's a lot of maturity in it relative to IoT because in a lot of cases there is a device on the other side of which you're trying to scan chip or whatever into the system. So those are actually pretty good standards to take a look at. And that's my desktop. See? Pretty messy over here. You can. So anyway. You can applaud now, come on.